Have you ever imagined that a simple act of courage could completely change two lives in a single night? That question sounds like something out of a movie, but the story you're about to hear today is real and took place amid the chaos of a storm. Imagine the scene. Dark streets, streetlights swaying in the wind, thunder splitting the sky, and rain mercilessly pounding the city. People ran for shelter, doors were hastily locked, and in the midst of this almost cinematic scene, an elderly woman finds herself alone, trying to cross a street flooded with water. The wind dragged her steps, and her trembling hands clutched bags that threatened to fall with every second. It was the perfect image of human vulnerability in the face of the force of nature. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Among the hurried faces that simply passed by without looking back, a teenager appeared, someone who could have easily continued on his way, but chose to stop. And it is precisely here that the essence of this story arises, the decision not to turn your back on those in need. Have you ever been there? At a point where you could simply ignore the situation, but something inside spoke louder. This young man had no wealth, no titles, no quest for recognition. He only had courage and a heart willing to act. In the midst of the storm, while everyone else was thinking only of protecting themselves, he ran against the wind and rain, reached out, and did what seemed impossible. He saved the elderly woman from greater danger. The gesture, which might have seemed small or even insignificant to outsiders, took on gigantic proportions, because ultimately it wasn't just a physical rescue, but an act of kindness that carried with it a profound impact. This is the kind of story that makes us rethink the choices we make every day. We often imagine that great transformations arise only from grandiose moments, but the truth is that they happen precisely in the simplest moments. When someone decides to act with compassion instead of indifference, and perhaps that's why this case has so resonated with everyone who heard about it. It's not just about a teenager and an elderly woman in distress. It's about courage, about humanity, and about the flame of hope that persists even in the darkest nights. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. The identity of this teenager, who seemed like just an ordinary young man, held secrets that would completely change the course of this story. And not only was the elderly woman's life touched, but his as well, in ways he could never have imagined. There's a hidden truth here, something that goes beyond the rescue itself. It's about how a simple gesture can trigger a wave of transformation, both internal and external, capable of echoing far longer than a severe storm. When we talk about acts of kindness, we think of something beautiful, but often fleeting. However, this episode shows us that even seemingly small decisions can open up entire paths of change. The elderly woman's vulnerability reflected the fragility of all of us in difficult times, but the young man's attitude reminded us that we are never truly alone. There is always someone willing to lend a hand, to brave the wind for us, to believe that solidarity still has power. This introduction is just the beginning of a journey that goes far beyond a rescue amidst the storm, because, as you'll see, the true impact of that night wasn't limited to the flooded streets or the fright of a dangerous moment. It extended to both their lives, bringing revelations, opportunities, and a transformation no one could have foreseen. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. When we hear stories like these, it's impossible not to think about our own choices, about those times when life presented us with a simple decision that could have changed someone's course. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Perhaps you were helped when you least expected it, or perhaps you were the one who reached out in the midst of a storm, literal or emotional. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most, because sharing these experiences not only strengthens the message, but also creates a network of hope among all of us gathered here. That's why your participation is so important. When you comment, like, and subscribe, it's not just a click on a screen, it's a gesture that helps bring these stories of courage and kindness to even more people who need to hear that the world still has room for genuine gestures. This is how this channel grows and continues to bring stories that inspire, move, and transform. So, if this content touched you in any way, please like and subscribe to continue following this journey with us. After all, every comment, every word of support makes all the difference in building this community of people who believe that empathy and solidarity can indeed change destinies. And now, back to our story. The storm seemed to carry with it not only the fury of nature, but also the weight of something greater, as if the sky had decided to reveal a hidden truth that night. Thunder tore through the silence of the city with an almost deafening force, and each flash of lightning illuminated the flooded streets for a few seconds, revealing scenes of desperation and hustling. People huddled under awnings, took shelter in the entrances of closed shops, clutching bags and coats to their bodies as if that were enough to ward off the chill that pierced their bones. The sound of the rain wasn't just noise, it was like a heavy melody that dictated the rhythm of every hurried step, every lost glance searching for safety. Amidst this chaotic scene, there was a clear sense of collective vulnerability. Cars screeched to a halt, unable to cross the flooded streets. Desperate drivers honked their horns in vain. Children cried, adults grew angry, and the entire city seemed to have surrendered to the fury of the storm. But at the same time, within this chaos, stories lay hidden that no one would ever have imagined. It was as if the stage had been carefully set for something extraordinary to be revealed, for a simple act to become a watershed moment. Amidst the shadows and the blinding rain, a teenager walked. He seemed no different from so many others, and perhaps that was precisely what made his presence almost imperceptible. But within him lay a quiet strength, a mindset shaped not only by youth, but by experiences he kept secret. He observed his surroundings carefully, as if seeking more than just shelter. The thunder didn't intimidate him, the rain didn't make him hesitate. It was as if he knew his journey that night was no accident. And then, amid the darkness cut through by lightning, a scene captured his attention. A frail, elderly woman trying to cross the street as the rushing water threatened to sweep her away at any moment. Her hands trembled, her steps slow and unsteady, and each movement seemed like a desperate plea for help. The people around her, trapped in their own fears, watched without acting. It was as if everyone had forgotten that, deep down, every life matters, that small gestures can be the thin line between tragedy and hope. The teenager's heart raced. There, before his eyes, was the revelation of a purpose. He had a choice: remain a spectator or become the protagonist of that night. And it's curious how decisions like these seem small at the time they're made, but carry the weight of transforming destinies. The hidden truth that no one there saw was that this moment wouldn't just be about crossing a street or overcoming a current. It would be about courage, about the invisible connection that unites strangers in times of crisis, about remembering that we are capable of much more than we imagine when we put others first. As the storm battered the city, a conviction blossomed within him. His feet advanced without hesitation, defying the biting cold and the water lapping against his legs. With each step, the tension grew, but with it came clarity. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a call to show that humanity still pulsates, even in the shadows of difficult times. It was an act that to many might seem merely a youthful impulse, but one that carried the essence of transformation, both for those who would be saved and for those who dared to save. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, Because when we talk about courage amidst chaos, we're not just describing a fleeting moment of heroism, we're talking about choices that reveal character, decisions that can change lives forever. What seemed like just an ordinary storm was actually about to become the stage for a story that would touch hearts and serve as a powerful reminder that hope can emerge even in the darkest scenarios. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The scene seemed ripped from a dramatic film, but it was real life unfolding before the eyes of anyone who dared to look closely. In the midst of the storm, as the rain pounded the city with relentless force, a frail figure stood out against the grey backdrop. It was an elderly woman, small, bent over by the weight not only of the bag she carried, but also of the years that had accumulated on her shoulders. Her soaked coat clung to her body, her grey hair, dishevelled by the water, fell over her tired face. Every step she took felt like a battle. Against the current building in the street, against the wind pushing her body back, against her own vulnerability that became visible with every hesitant movement. The bags she carried weren't just ordinary objects. They were the silent symbol of her routine, perhaps groceries, perhaps something simple but essential. At that moment, however, each item seemed to weigh tons, and the effort to hold them steady nearly unbalanced her. Her feet sought firm purchase on the slippery asphalt, but the rushing water turned the ground into a treacherous trap, and there was no one nearby willing to lend a hand. People watched her from afar, some hiding under awnings, others hurrying for refuge, but all with the same attitude, waiting for the danger to pass without getting involved. It was a cruel portrait of how, in moments of chaos, we often close ourselves off in our own struggles, forgetting that others also carry pain, fears, and needs. But that elderly woman, alone in the middle of the street, represented more than weakness. She represented a calling. Life, from time to time, presents us with scenes that test our mentality, that challenge us to step out of the role of spectator and take an active role. The teenager watching knew this, even if not consciously. He felt deep within himself that hidden truth, that humanity only stands when we care for one another, was revealing itself there, amidst thunder and lightning. The water's current grew stronger by the minute. The bags hit the elderly woman's legs, throwing her off balance even further. Her arms trembled not only from the cold, but from the effort of resisting. There was a moment when it seemed she would be swallowed by the force of the storm. The hearts of those watching tightened, for it was impossible not to feel the impact of that scene. It was as if life were reminding us that, behind the routine, the commitments, and the rush, there is always someone who needs a gesture. And it was in this contrast, between fragility and quiet courage, that the story began to take on another dimension. The teenager, still at a distance, felt that this was the moment to make a decision. The elderly woman's journey down the street wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. It represented the daily struggle of thousands of invisible people who carry the weight of their bags, their pain, their stories, trying not to be swept away by the waters of hardship. With each step, a revelation. That kindness, when it emerges, can transform not just an instant, but an entire life. Her gaze, fixed across the street, revealed a silent determination. She wanted to get there, no matter what. There was no apparent heroism, just the need to survive. But it is precisely in these details that the greatest lessons lie: resilience, dignity, the fight for continuity, even when everything seems against it. And yet, there was something no one there could deny. Without help, perhaps that path would be impossible to complete. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because what seemed like just an elderly woman in distress was actually a mirror reflecting the essence of humanity. That challenging journey invites us to reflect on our own decisions, on how many times we choose to look away instead of taking action. The elderly woman, with her bags and her fragility, carried an invisible weight that went beyond the storm. She carried the reminder that we all, at some point, need someone. Right there. I'm on this journey too. He appeared almost like a shadow against the curtain of rain, an ordinary teenager, the kind who would easily go unnoticed amidst the hustle and bustle of the city. His clothes were soaked, his sneakers heavy with accumulated water, and his hair plastered to his forehead, but there was something in his gaze that clashed with the general indifference. While many huddled under awnings, umbrellas, or simply waited for the storm to pass, he kept his eyes fixed on the elderly woman, as if the scene before him held a special weight. There was no time for calculations, for weighing risks, or thinking about rewards. The decision was born the instant he recognized her vulnerability and knew, deep down, that he could not simply watch. He was just a teenager, simple, anonymous, but he possessed a rare sensitivity, the ability to see beyond the surface. He didn't just see a woman struggling against the rain, but a human being about to be overcome by chaos. And it's in these moments that one's mindset is tested, when the hidden truth of who we truly are is revealed. His choice, however small it may seem, was a powerful revelation about character, about the ability to put others before oneself in a decisive moment. His steps toward the elderly woman were firm, even though the water lashed against his legs and the wind made it difficult to see. Every movement conveyed determination. It wasn't his strong body or experience that guided him, but courage. Courage born from the heart and requiring no explanation. How many times in life do we encounter situations where we could act but choose to hide in neutrality? How many times could someone's journey beside us have been different if we had reached out? This young man decided not to be just a spectator, and that changes everything. The people around him, even without realizing it, were witnessing something beyond the ordinary. He crossed the street with the conviction of someone who understands that life is built on small decisions. The transformation that would come from that moment wasn't just about immediate help, but also about the invisible impact that a gesture of kindness can have. The teenager, without any title or recognition, carried within him the power of an everyday hero. Heroes like this don't wear capes or shine in the spotlight. They appear at the right time when all seems lost and offer a helping hand. As he approached, one detail became clear. His eyes conveyed not fear, but empathy. He seemed to say without words, "You are not alone." This is the kind of message that requires no words, that is communicated in the simplicity of an act. The behind the scenes of this scene is revealing. It wasn't just a physical rescue, but a lesson in mentality, in how we face the difficulties of others and decide to act. The impact of such an attitude goes far beyond the moment. It reverberates, inspires, plants seeds in the hearts of those who watch. And perhaps this is the hidden truth of kindness. It doesn't require grandiosity, just a willingness to move when the world insists on standing still. This teenager's journey didn't begin in that storm, but his decision in that moment would be remembered as a milestone, a revelation that courage isn't about age, but about choice. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the way he launched himself into that scene shows that there's something greater behind human instincts, an invisible connection that guides us when we must choose between action or retreat. The young man didn't hesitate, and this lack of hesitation is what differentiates spectators from real-life protagonists. Comment there? That makes sense to me. The scene seemed straight out of a dramatic film, but it was happening before everyone's eyes. The teenager ran toward the elderly woman without hesitation, his feet sinking into the puddles that turned into small streams. the deafening sound of the rain mixed with the rumble of thunder. Each step was a struggle against the force of the water, but also an affirmation of his resolve. He didn't look back, didn't wait for anyone to come and help him, didn't worry about his own safety. His instinct was clear. This woman needed him, and that was all that mattered. The elderly woman, already staggering, tried desperately to keep her balance, but the bag she was carrying pulled her even further down. Her arms trembled, and the fear on her face was evident, as if every second could be her last. Then, just as everything seemed to be falling apart, she felt a firm hand grip hers. It was a shock of relief and surprise. The teenager, soaked, reached out with all his strength and, with a determined tug, lifted the elderly woman from the brink. Her expression changed instantly, from panic to hope. This simple yet impactful gesture was a symbol of the power of human empathy. Imagine the emotional transformation that occurred in that second. For the old woman, it wasn't just an outstretched hand. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone in the world. For the teenager, it wasn't just a physical rescue. It was the revelation of a hidden truth within himself, that he was capable of much more than he ever imagined. These kinds of moments are what mark someone's life, because it's not just about crossing a street during a storm, but about crossing an internal boundary between indifference and courage. As he helped her to her feet, their eyes met. No words were necessary. The current of energy that passed through them was stronger than any speech. He exuded confidence, she exuded gratitude. It was as if they were both sharing the same journey, even though they had never met before. Amidst the chaos outside, there was a moment of silence between them, as if time had stopped to highlight that gesture. These are the revelations life gives us unexpectedly, reminding us of the impact our choices have on others. Around them, some people began to take in the scene, but most were still more concerned with sheltering from the rain. Few noticed the heroic scene unfolding just a few meters away, and this brings up a powerful reflection. How many acts of kindness go unnoticed every day? How many times does someone make a courageous decision and yet the world remains indifferent? The difference here is that this particular moment was about to change not only the elderly woman's life, but also the young man's. Because some decisions transform not only the receiver, but also the giver. The teenager supported the elderly woman firmly, carefully guiding her out of the current that threatened to sweep her away. His thin body seemed small against the force of the water, but his determination made him immense. This scene is a reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And in that moment, fear had no place. The impact of this choice would become part of a larger narrative, something that would transcend the confines of that rainy night and resonate as a universal lesson. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what seemed like just a rescue amidst the storm carried something much greater. The revelation of an invisible link between two lives and proof that small gestures can become unforgettable milestones. The teenager didn't just hold an elderly woman's hand, he seized the opportunity to show that humanity still exists. Right there. I'm on this journey too. The moment after the rescue seemed charged with an indescribable energy. The elderly woman, still trembling, held tightly to the teenager's arm as if clinging to a lifeline in the midst of a shipwreck. Her breathing was labored, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. But as she realized she was safe, a new light appeared in her eyes, a light of relief, of renewed hope, of the life restored to her in that unexpected embrace. The tears streaming down her wrinkled face were not just from fright, but from a deep, almost silent gratitude that dispensed with words. The teenager, drenched from head to toe, felt the weight of that responsibility as something greater than himself. He hadn't planned to be a hero, hadn't rehearsed any scenes of bravery. He simply answered his heart's call at the exact moment it mattered most. And although his posture was firm and determined, within him was also emotion, a mixture of adrenaline, nervousness, and a sense of purpose he had perhaps never experienced before. It was as if, in a few seconds, he had crossed an invisible border, leaving behind the image of an ordinary young man and assuming that of someone capable of making a difference. This duality between fragility and strength, fear and courage, made the scene even more powerful. The contrast between the elderly woman with her exposed vulnerability and the teenager with his unexpected determination formed a symbolic image of what is most beautiful about humanity, the solidarity that flourishes. Precisely in moments of greatest chaos, the psychological impact of this exchange was immense, not only for the two protagonists, but also for anyone who witnessed it firsthand, because at its core, it was a reminder that every life can be transformed in seconds by a gesture of compassion. The elderly woman, still in shock, squeezed his hand as if to say, "Don't let go." And that contact spoke volumes. There was trust, surrender, the hidden truth that we all, at some point, need someone to support us. And the teenager, even without fully understanding the magnitude of the situation, held on tightly, conveying security with a serenity that his own eyes perhaps couldn't quite hold inside. It was a scene of mutual revelations. She rediscovering that she wasn't alone, he discovering his own ability to face the impossible. The sound of the storm still echoed, but it seemed distant, almost irrelevant compared to the intensity of that encounter. The rain continued to fall, but now it was like a backdrop to the unfolding emotion. There was a profound, almost symbolic truth there. Even amidst chaos and torment, life insists on giving us signs that it's worth believing in humanity. This mindset of hope is what sustains the journey of so many who face dark days, because deep down, we all carry the desire to find or be someone who will lend a hand when we need it most. And this emotion wasn't just individual. What happened at that point on the street, amid the storm, had a greater impact, as if it were a collective reminder. Often in the rush of everyday life, we forget that the most transformative stories arise from simple but courageous decisions. The teenager could have simply passed by, could have looked from afar and decided there was nothing he could do. But he chose to act. This choice is what gives meaning to life's narrative and what transforms ordinary events into unforgettable moments. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the emotion of that moment didn't end there. It opened the door to revelations that would forever change the course of both their lives. The gesture was not only a physical rescue, but also a spiritual, psychological, and human milestone with ramifications far beyond that storm. Comment there, that makes sense to me. It was almost paradoxical. After such a grand gesture, so charged with emotional impact, the teenager didn't seek recognition, didn't expect applause, didn't desire his name to be remembered as that of a hero. On the contrary, he seemed eager to disappear into the shadows of the rainy night, as if his presence there were merely a passing detail. This choice, to avoid the spotlight, revealed even more about his essence. True humility, the kind that doesn't need witnesses to validate what the heart already knows is right. As the elderly woman, still shaken, tried to organize her bags and catch her breath, her eyes searched for him, wanting to thank him once more. But it was too late. The young man, discreet and hurried, walked in the opposite direction, merging with the crowd that was beginning to circulate again as the storm began to weaken. He walked away without looking back, as if carrying a secret. as if knowing that the value of his actions depends not on public recognition, but on a hidden truth that only he understood. This intriguing detail, not wanting to be seen, not claiming anything for himself, further transformed the story's atmosphere. Who was this teenager? What drove him? What inner journey could explain such detachment? Normally, in heroic situations, society is quick to identify names, faces, and contexts. But here, the mystery became a fundamental part of the impact. There was nothing but the memory of the steady hand, the resolute gaze, and the swift departure. It's interesting to think that life's greatest gestures often happen this way, silently, discreetly, without the expectation of applause. And that's precisely why they're so powerful. This young man's distance, rather than diminishing his importance, further amplified the scene's effect. It was as if his anonymity were an invitation for all of us to reflect. How many times has someone helped us without seeking recognition? How many times do acts of kindness go unnoticed, yet still transform destinies? The elderly woman who remained there, clutching her bag tightly and now breathing more calmly, carried within her not only the relief of having been saved, but also an intense curiosity. Who could that boy have been? Why had he helped her so courageously and then disappeared? These questions, more than generating doubts, sparked a new perspective on life. The realization that true heroes often don't wear capes, don't give interviews or seek fame. They pass us by anonymously, but leave lasting marks. This mystery was beginning to create layers in the narrative. Anonymity wasn't just an absence of identity, but a symbol of something greater. The idea that kindness doesn't need an audience, that courage can hide in the details, and that deep down, the backstage of life is full of revelations that never make the headlines. This mindset is transformative because it challenges us to rethink the value of small choices, the silent decisions that change the course of a journey without anyone noticing. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because the teenager's disappearance didn't end the story. On the contrary, it paved the way for something even more surprising to be revealed, something that would show that his identity held much more than anyone could have imagined. Right there, I'm on this journey too. The scene seemed charged with a unique energy. The elderly woman, her clothes still soaked from the storm, stared at the teenager as if she saw not just a face, but an answer. Her heart beat between relief and curiosity, and the need to thank him almost surpassed the fear she had felt minutes before. She held his hand tightly, not just as if seeking physical support, but as if wanting to connect deeply with the one who had just saved her life. And then, her voice still trembling but charged with emotion, she insisted, "What is your name?" This detail seemed simple, but the weight of the moment transformed the question into something much bigger. After all, giving one's name was revealing oneself, allowing one's identity to cease being a mystery. The teenager, however, hesitated. His eyes, which had previously shown firmness and courage, now carried a shadow of internal conflict. He looked away for a moment, as if searching the puddles of water reflecting the streetlights for a way out of that question. It was clear there was something hidden, a hidden truth he wasn't ready to expose. His silence spoke louder than words. The elderly woman noticed this pause and understood that the young man was not just a stranger passing by. There was a story behind that gesture, a journey he might not have been willing to share. And it was precisely at this point that the narrative became even more intriguing. The hero who saves, but who refuses to be known. The contrast between the courage to face a storm and the reluctance to speak his own name evoked a new kind of impact. It's as if we were facing someone carrying invisible burdens, as if his every choice was measured not only by the present, but also by scars from the past. And this momentary refusal to identify himself brought up a powerful reflection. Could true greatness lie precisely in those who don't seek recognition? Could it be that life's greatest heroes are those who prefer to remain behind the scenes, even when they could be applauded on stage? The elderly woman, sensing this mystery, didn't insist harshly. Instead, she gently squeezed his hand and simply repeated, "Thank you." This simple gesture carried a world of meaning. Her gratitude didn't depend on knowing who he was. It was in the act itself, in the impact he had made. Still, there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes, a hunch that this teenager was hiding something transformative. And here we come to a fascinating point. Human connection goes beyond names, documents, or titles. Sometimes, what truly matters is the impression someone leaves on our hearts. However, his hesitation raised inevitable questions. What was the truth behind this young man? What revelations might emerge if he decided to share his story? The mystery deepened, and at the same time the scene gained even more depth. The rain continued to fall lightly, but now it wasn't the storm that dominated the scene. It was the silence between them, charged with meaning. And it is in this space that the narrative expands, as each viewer begins to ask themselves, how many times in life have we crossed paths with people who changed our destiny without us even knowing their names? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the elderly woman's insistence on being grateful and the young man's reluctance to reveal himself paved the way for something even greater, a revelation that would forever change the way she and we would view that moment. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Gradually, as the hours and days passed, that scene that seemed like just an isolated act of kindness began to take on much larger dimensions. The elderly woman couldn't get the teenager's gaze out of her mind, that mix of courage and hesitation, as if there were a hidden truth behind his gestures. It was impossible to forget the firmness with which he held her in the most difficult moment, and at the same time, the humility in refusing even the simple acknowledgement of her name. And it was precisely this mix of mystery and emotional impact that sparked a collective curiosity, because the story spread. People who witnessed or heard about it began to comment, and little by little, the young man's identity was revealed. This wasn't just an ordinary teenager who happened to be passing by. A journey of transformation had been etched into his life. It turned out he came from a harsh reality, fraught with losses and challenges that would have brought many down. He was someone who had faced internal storms far greater than that torrential rain in the streets. And perhaps it was precisely this experience of overcoming that gave him the courage to act without thinking of himself, putting the safety of others above his own. This surprising revelation brought to light a powerful contrast. Someone young who could easily have been overcome by difficulties chose a different path. He transformed pain into empathy, scars into fuel for good, showing that the decisions we make in the silence of our hearts can redefine not only our destiny, but also that of those who cross our path. The impact of this act began to be seen not just as a coincidence, but as a symbol of a resilient mindset, of conscious choices that reflect character and greatness of spirit. With each detail uncovered about his life, the scene from the night of the storm became more remarkable. It wasn't just the story of a teenager helping a helpless elderly woman. It was proof that when we carry within us the resolve to be greater than our circumstances, we can become instruments of transformation. What for many would be merely an adrenaline rush, for him was the purest expression of someone who had learned, through his personal struggles, that life only gains meaning when we reach out to others. And this revelation impacted not only the elderly woman who already saw the young man as an angel sent her way, but also everyone who heard the story. It was impossible not to reflect. How many times do we fail to act out of fear, complacency, or a belief that we lack the strength? And yet, a simple teenager showed that courage has no age, that kindness doesn't depend on conditions, and that true greatness lies in the small choices we make when no one expects anything of us. What's most fascinating is that his identity wasn't just a name or a face, but a legacy of decisions that transformed him into someone capable of inspiring others. The hidden truth that was revealed wasn't in a title or official recognition, but in the way he led his life. And this taught a silent but powerful lesson. We don't need applause to be great, nor the spotlight to change the world. We only need the willingness to act, even when no one is looking. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because the revelation of this teenager's identity was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something even greater, an impact that reached beyond the night of the storm and spread beyond what he could have imagined. Right there, I'm on this journey too. The revelation of who that teenager was began to gain even more strength when the behind the scenes of his life came to light. Behind the young face, the determined gaze, and the heroic gesture of that stormy night lay a story marked by financial hardship, absences that left deep scars, and challenges that forged in him a sensitivity rare for someone his age. He wasn't born into an environment of privilege, quite the opposite. He grew up learning from an early age to deal with the harshness of reality. Every choice he made, every step he took, was guided not by comfort, but by the need to resist, to reinvent himself, to survive when everything seemed to be working against him. His past was filled with moments when life seemed to test him, testing his mentality and inner strength. He lost important people too soon, experienced the bitter feeling of having what was essential suddenly ripped away, and often had to make decisions that shaped his maturity even before adolescence. These experiences, rather than hardening him, made him capable of seeing the pain of others with depth, as if each wound he carried was also a bridge to understanding their suffering. It's fascinating to realize how the greatest lessons, the ones that truly impact and leave lasting marks, don't come from beautiful theories or well-crafted speeches, but rather from the behind the scenes of real life, where each person's hidden truth is revealed in the details. This teenager knew what it was like to be hungry, what it was like to walk without knowing where to sleep that night, what it was like to need an outstretched hand and find no one. And precisely because he had experienced all of this, he didn't hesitate to become that outstretched hand to the elderly woman amid the chaos of the storm. Some say character is shaped in easy times, but in practice, it's in moments of pain and uncertainty that someone's true essence reveals itself. The young man who threw himself against the current that night had already faced invisible battles that many wouldn't endure. And that's why, when the time came to act, he didn't hesitate. His decision wasn't just the fruit of momentary courage, but the result of a mindset built over years of silent struggle. The deep impact of that gesture, therefore, stemmed not only from physical strength or youthful bravery, but from the inner transformation he had been carrying for a long time. These behind-the-scenes moments reveal something powerful. Life didn't spare him, but it didn't break him either. On the contrary, every loss, every frustration, every night he considered giving up prepared him to be exactly who he was at that crucial moment. Perhaps, if he had grown up in a comfortable reality, he would never have felt the urgency to care so deeply about the pain of someone he barely knew. His journey shows that moments of darkness can become fuel to illuminate the lives of others. And here lies an even deeper revelation. Sometimes our own wounds are what give us the sensitivity to recognize the vulnerability of others. This teenager knew, almost instinctively, that the elderly woman might not survive alone, because at some point in his life he himself was on the verge of falling, and he knows how a Steady hand can be the difference between giving up and carrying on. This invisible connection between what he had experienced and what was happening that night is what makes his story so inspiring. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding his journey is essential to understanding the true impact of this encounter. It wasn't just an isolated scene in the midst of a storm. It reflected an entire journey. Decisions made in silence, scars that became strength. Comment there. That makes sense to me. What we often forget is that a simple gesture can create echoes that extend far beyond that moment. For the elderly woman, the impact of the teenager's actions was almost immediate, but the emotional consequences lasted much longer. When he held her and helped her up, it wasn't just her body that regained strength, it was also her heart, which until then had been beating amid fear and fragility. She had left home that afternoon simply to run everyday errands, believing it would be just another ordinary day. But suddenly, she found herself faced with the hidden truth of life. In a matter of seconds, everything can change, and we don't always have the strength to face it alone. In that impromptu embrace, under the storm, she felt a different energy. It wasn't just the warmth of the firm hands lifting her, but the revelation that genuine kindness still existed in a world so often dominated by indifference and haste. For years, perhaps even decades, she had accumulated experiences that made her doubt humanity, that made her believe that everyone only cared about themselves. And yet, in that moment of despair, an anonymous young man decided to risk his own safety for someone he didn't even know. This detail rekindled a hope in her that had seemed lost, like a forgotten flame suddenly burning bright again. The emotional impact was so profound that it wasn't just gratitude. It was something greater, a true transformation in the way she saw the people around her. Suddenly, the flooded streets no longer seemed just a scene of chaos, but also a stage where solidarity could flourish. With each flash of lightning that split the sky, she no longer felt only fear, but also a reminder that just as light breaks through darkness, kindness can break through selfishness. This thought wasn't a philosophical abstraction, it was a concrete experience lived in the flesh that renewed her faith in humanity. And here comes something even more powerful. It wasn't just her body that emerged strengthened from this encounter, but her mind as well. Until then, she had carried a constant feeling of fragility, as if she were merely a passive spectator of life, waiting for the years and fate to decide for her. However, the teenager's gesture brought her a new sense of worth. She realized that even in her vulnerability, she was still someone worth saving, someone for whom another would risk everything. This revelation profoundly shook her. Self-esteem, bringing a surge of dignity and hope she perhaps hadn't experienced in a long time. This rediscovery of human solidarity wasn't limited to that moment. In the days that followed, every time she remembered the scene, something inside her warmed. And as happens with many powerful stories, the effect spread. She began talking about what happened with family, neighbors, and even strangers, describing in detail the young man's bravery and how he restored her confidence. By sharing her experience, she herself became a messenger of transformation, inspiring others to believe in kindness again. This cycle of impact shows how a single act can multiply, creating invisible ripples that spread far beyond what we imagine. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the change didn't just happen in the young hero's life, but also in the way the elderly woman saw herself and the world. And this duality, that of the savior and the saved, reveals one of the most fascinating aspects of the human journey. When one helps the other, both are transformed. Right there, I'm on this journey too. When something genuine happens before people's eyes, There's no hiding it. That's exactly what happened when the story of the teenager and the elderly woman began to gain traction beyond that isolated moment in the storm. First, it was their neighbors who learned about it, people who lived nearby and witnessed the scene from afar, or heard the screams that echoed through that rainy night. Word of mouth quickly spread, charged with emotion, and more people began to repeat the episode as a rare example of courage and solidarity. The neighborhood, which often seemed indifferent to the suffering of others, found in that act a spark of collective inspiration, something capable of uniting different generations around a common truth. There are still young people willing to make a difference. The elderly woman's friends didn't remain silent either. Every time someone visited her, she would recount in detail how she had been saved, always with teary eyes and a choked voice, emphasizing that if it weren't for that young man, she might not be alive anymore. This kind of narrative, charged with emotion, made people feel part of it, as if the act of kindness had somehow touched each of them. Gradually, the community began to see the teenager not just as an ordinary boy, but as a kind of unsung hero, someone who represented the noblest aspects of human nature. When local newspapers caught wind of the story, the impact was even greater. A simple note published about the rescue gained unexpected attention because it wasn't just another story of tragedy or urban chaos. It was a story of hope, a revelation that went against the tide of bad news and reminded everyone that even amidst storms, real or symbolic, there are still gestures that rekindle faith in humanity. Reporters tracked down the elderly woman, sought witnesses, but the teenager always seemed to avoid the spotlight, almost as if he didn't want to be recognized. This detail further heightened curiosity around him, transforming his image into something greater than a simple act. He became a symbol. And here comes a powerful reflection. When a community mobilizes around an example of kindness, the impact multiplies. People who previously barely spoke to each other began to comment on the gesture. Neighbors who rarely exchanged words now shared a sense of collective pride, and even local children began to repeat the story as if telling a modern legend. The teenager unintentionally became a role model, and his actions began to inspire small acts in people's daily lives. Someone helping carry bags, another offering an umbrella to someone who was soaking wet, and even young people being kinder to the elderly. The most interesting thing is that the recognition wasn't limited to admiration. Many people wanted to know more about him, where he came from, what his story was, why he had done it. It was as if there was a hidden truth behind his eyes, a narrative greater than the simple rescue, something that needed to be revealed so that everyone could understand the magnitude of that act. This desire to understand the teenagers behind the scenes wasn't mere curiosity. It was a search for meaning, an attempt to understand how someone so young could possess such maturity and courage. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because the community's reaction was just scratching the surface. The true impact of this story was just beginning to unfold, and as more people discovered the details, a quiet transformation spread, shifting not only perceptions of him, but also of what it truly means to be human. Comment there. That makes sense to me. What began as a spontaneous gesture on a stormy night soon transformed into something much bigger in the teenager's life. The community, deeply touched by what had happened, began to see him not just as a hero of the moment, but as someone worthy of investment, someone who deserved a future different from the one fate seemed to have in store. Soon, local associations, schools, and even companies came together to offer support. Scholarships he could never have dreamed of appeared, as did invitations to training programs, and even people willing to pay for materials and courses so he could develop his talents. It was as if an invisible door had opened before him, a path that showed him that his courage had not only saved a life, but also reshaped the course of his own journey. This recognition didn't come artificially or forced. It stemmed from the truth of the gesture, from the purity of the decision he had made in seconds. That young man, who until then had walked the streets like any other anonymous person, was now called by name in conversations, cited in news reports as an example, and remembered by children as someone to follow. This impact, however, wasn't limited to the external gaze. Within him, a silent transformation was also taking place. For the first time, he began to believe he was capable of something greater, that his decisions had value, and that his life, despite its difficulties, held a special meaning. This process of changing his mindset was as important as the opportunities that arose. And here lies a revelation that few realize. When life confronts us with extreme situations like that storm, the choices we make reveal who we truly are. The teenager in acting never imagined he was writing a decisive chapter in his own story, but it was precisely this lack of calculation, this authentic surrender, that made all the difference. Now, with new doors opening, he faced a different challenge. Learning to deal with recognition, maintaining humility, and at the same time finding the courage to accept that he deserved these opportunities. This is something we often forget. Accepting the good also requires maturity. And what's most fascinating is how the impact of an act of kindness can trigger a chain of unpredictable events. A scholarship offered meant access to a future of possibilities, but it also represented the chance to break cycles of hardship that had plagued her family for years. The community's support wasn't just material, it was also emotional, as if everyone was saying in unison, "We believe in you." This support network became almost a collective embrace, proving that solidarity can transform not only those who receive it, but also those who offer it. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this transformation wasn't just about external rewards. The real impact was happening within him, in the way he began to see himself and the world around him. This inner change is what truly shapes destinies and defines who we will be from now on. Right there, I'm on this journey too. The most impressive thing about this entire journey is realizing how a gesture that seemed small compared to the enormity of the problem ended up becoming a great story capable of touching countless lives. That teenager's courage and kindness were seeds planted in fertile ground, and every glance that witnessed or heard about what he did ended up being watered by this silent inspiration. There are moments in life when we think that what we do is too little, insignificant in the face of chaos. But the hidden truth is that the greatest impacts come precisely from those seemingly simple decisions. An outstretched hand in the midst of a storm, a yes when everyone else would say no, a gesture of solidarity when logic would dictate thinking only of oneself. It is at this point that destiny bows before our courage. Looking back, we realize that great transformations almost always arise from discrete acts, those that don't demand an audience or immediate recognition. The teenager was unaware of the magnitude of the impact his gesture would have, and perhaps that's precisely what makes it so powerful. He didn't act, expecting applause, but because something inside him told him it was the right choice. And here we find a universal lesson that spans generations. Genuine goodness needs no justification. It carries within itself the power to transform. And isn't it curious how stories like these resonate not only with those involved, but with all of us who listen? Because in a way, each narrative of courage and kindness acts as a mirror. It makes us reflect on our own decisions, on those moments when we too had the chance to act and perhaps back down. This intimate confrontation with our choices awakens something greater, the desire to be better, to not let the next opportunity to lend a helping hand slip away. The impact isn't just in the act itself, but in the ripple effect it generates, touching consciences and awakening faith in humanity. And here lies something profound. If a single action amidst chaos was capable of changing destinies, imagine what would happen if each of us, in our daily lives, allowed ourselves to act with the same mindset. The world, which so often seems burdened by harshness and indifference, would begin to be reshaped not by great revolutions, but by thousands of small gestures scattered throughout. It is the sum of these details that creates immense stories. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this reflection leads us to understand that it's not just about individual courage, but a collective calling. Every choice we make, no matter how small, has the power to be the spark that rekindles hope in someone's heart. Comment there. That makes sense to me. And given all this, perhaps the most important question right now isn't just about the teenager, the elderly woman, or that storm. The real question is, how do we react when life presents us with situations where we can choose between indifference and courage, between silence and compassion? These stories aren't just told to move us, but to remind us that each of us plays a role in the invisible fabric that sustains humanity. Small gestures, seemingly simple choices, can be the thread that keeps someone standing, that renews hope, or that restores faith in better days. That's why this kind of story is so powerful. It connects us to the deepest part of human essence, showing us that kindness isn't dead, just dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken through our actions. And when we stop to reflect on the impact this has, we understand that it's not just the life of the receiver that changes, but also that of the giver. The journey of transformation is mutual, and each act of generosity is, in fact, a silent invitation for others to do the same. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this is the time to turn inspiration into action. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an act of kindness that transformed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments, like, and subscribe to follow more inspiring stories like this. And if you've made it this far with me, it already shows that this story spoke to your heart in some way. So I want to invite you to continue walking with me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories that, like this one, bring life lessons that touch deeply and make a difference. And take the opportunity to leave a simple phrase in the comments that will show you were with me until the end. Write, "I'm with you until the end." This creates a beautiful connection between us and shows how much this space is created by real people who believe in the power of kindness. Oh, and don't forget to like, because it's the sign that this message resonated with you. Now, if you want to continue this reflection, there's a video here that perfectly complements this topic. Click and stay with me there, because I'm sure it will inspire you even more.